Welcome to Waking the Why, a podcast about uncovering the purpose behind life's crucible moments. Each episode, you'll hear from real people who turn their struggles into strength and their stories into light. If you're searching for meaning, walking through something hard, or just love stories that stir the soul, you're in the right place.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Waking the Why, where we discover the purpose behind life's crucible moments. My name is Stacy Peterson, and our guest today is Jill Koford. Jill, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to hear your story. To start, tell us what you're doing. Tell us what you're up to.
Well, thank you, Stacy, for taking some time to have a conversation. I appreciate it. Right now, I'm serving in the Utah legislature. Wasn't something that was on my bingo card, but here we are. I'm just finishing up my first term as a representative for House District 10. It's been an honor and a privilege of a lifetime. At the first of this year, an opportunity presented itself to run for the state Senate. So I'm going to pivot and run for Senate District 5, which is about double the size of a House district in population and almost an area that goes clear up to Morgan, not to Enterprise, so Morgan County, out into Davis County, and then north to about 23rd Street in Ogden. Scoops in a little bit of the Ogden Valley. That's my latest and greatest adventure.
Wow, that's amazing. So why politics? What led you to where you're at today?
So I would say probably, I want to say 10 years, but it's been longer than that because we find ourselves in a time warp sometimes. But probably 15 years ago, I was frustrated. My husband and I were frustrated with, taxes, with policy, with things we saw happening in the world, and found ourselves complaining. And so I wanted to know more about how the political system in Utah worked. And I started volunteering for the local Weber County Republican Party. And you learn a lot when you're in the trenches there. And I got to know a lot of people who were in the policy space. Unfortunately, my complaining didn't stop there. May have ramped up a little bit.
I was like, did it get a little worse?
It might have gotten a little worse. And at one point, my husband just said, you know what, we've got to either do something and be part of the solution, or we have to stop complaining. Like, we either have to step up and try to make a change, or just be happy and enjoy our lives. And it probably would have been a lot easier to just be happy and enjoy our lives. But he kind of threw down, and I think he knew I wasn't going to just say no. So I actually ran in 2022 for the House, ran and lost by 500 votes. And then I was good at that point. I thought I had it on my system. And the Speaker of the House came to me and said, "Let's give it one more try." And I said, "Nope, not going to do that." And obviously, he bullied me just a little bit. I call it the perfect amount of pressure, and just said, if you'll figure out what it's going to take to get you to run, you'll have all the support you need. And I had so many people willing to help me. It was really, really humbling. They just really there were enough like-minded people in our district that wanted to see a change, that we had this groundswell of momentum. And so ran again in 24 and won. Here we are, trying to serve the people of House District 10, trying to make a difference. And really, fiscal policy is what drew me to what was happening in the state. Our spending just keeps increasing in every level of government, it seems like, and our taxes right along with it. And that's hard to watch.
Yeah. Prior to getting involved in politics, what did you do?
My husband and I own a number of small businesses. I actually own a graphic design business. I've done that since my kids are very, very, very little. And then he and I started a fertility business. He'd been in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. He lost his job. We had 3 young kids. It was a shot in the dark. We ended up working together for a number of years in the fertility space, just helping women get a discount on their medication when they were going through infertility treatment. We did that for about 15 years. And then while we were doing that, I had been a stay-at-home mom, working my graphic design business at night in my pajamas when the kids were in bed, trying to have a few clients here and there. And anyway, we decided at that point that we probably needed a couple of sources of income. And so we started a couple of different ventures while we were doing that. And what we do now is help small businesses with capital projects. So if they are in need of short-term capital lending, we help find that for small business.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And is it you and your husband? Do you have a team? What does that look like?
It's really just he and I. We work with a lot of people, just word of mouth. Although our kids have helped out, and all of my kids know how to run the books, which is nice. So when I'm MIA in Salt Lake at the Capitol, I have a backup team.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that MIA. So, you go into you're just finishing your first term. Was it what you expected?
Oh, I describe it this way. It's like running with your hair on fire. You're getting hit in the face with a fire hose, and you're pretty sure that there are people chasing you that aren't very happy, and you're not sure if you can outrun them. It is wide open. There's so much information. And for many of us that serve, we want to make really good decisions. And I think it feels so overwhelming because there's such a breadth of issues that you need to know and understand and make a decision about. And so that's where the fire hose of information, it's a constant learning process. And we say that it's part-time. I could spend 80 hours a week working on this. And sometimes you do, you just have to, but it's a lot of work and it's not part-time.
So with all, varied information coming your way, do you need to make a decision on how do you sift through it all? How do you approach it?
I always ask, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then are we solving it in a way that's the proper role of government? And then I have two measurements that I really lean on, and that's the state constitution and the federal constitution and my understanding of those documents, right? And so are those underlying principles of the policy we're trying to pass in line protecting our freedoms and our individual rights, or are we expanding government beyond what government really was meant to do? And so those are the questions that I try to ask. And fundamentally, a lot of people try to answer that question. Here's the problem that we're trying to fix or solve. And sometimes I know it doesn't feel like that when you're watching 500 bills go through the system, we had 1,000 bill files open this year. I think, thankfully, we passed fewer bills than we have in many years this year, and that's a good thing. Things happened at a slower pace this session, and maybe that's just because I already had the first session under my belt. Anyway, those are the questions that I try to answer, and really the fundamental principle documents that I try to use to make those decisions.
Yeah. As you reflect back on your life and all that you've done, what do you think prepared you the most for your role in the legislature?
That is a great question. And this is going to sound really odd, but I like to read code.
That's so odd.
I know. And it started when my husband and I started our business. I was the one that was reading the legal documents. I was the one interacting with legal, with our accountants, with our professional team. And I was the one helping to work on contracts. And even back at Uintah Elementary, when we had kids there, I was on community council, reading the bylaws, understanding the bylaws, and then understanding the state code that informed community council. Because those dollars I felt were so really sacred money that was given to parents and teachers and our community council to spend on behalf of our children and their education. I went into that wanting to understand the code, the bylaws, and how those governing documents determined how that money could be spent. So I don't know. And maybe it's because I was an English major in college and I like to diagram sentences. So I say that that's a superpower when you're reading code, because you have to know what the antecedent is to everything. What's it pointing to? What does this change really mean? And anyway. So
I really have valued your example with your community involvement. I remember serving on the community council with you for a short time there at Uintah, and just seeing your influence there and just throughout the community. It has really been amazing. What's your recommendation to individuals that either have a complaint, struggle with what's happening in our state, or that also maybe want to get involved? Like, what would you say to that audience? You got two different audiences, basically, right?
I know, right? Sometimes I think we think we don't know enough to have an opinion on something. And I would just say, put that thought out of your mind. Everybody has a different experience that will help inform any kind of decision or issue that we're facing. Don't be afraid to speak up. We need the voices. We need people engaged. It is always shocking and disheartening to me when I see either the voter turnout for municipal elections, say, right? I don't know where the rubber meets the road more than at city council. I don't know that I would ever want to do that job. It is every Tuesday, and it is unrelenting. And it is, they're there for work sessions at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're there till 10 o'clock at night. And it's not just that one meeting, it's all of the prep that goes into that. And And to see sometimes that nobody's at those meetings, that people aren't listening or paying attention, that's disheartening. And sometimes I think it's on us because we're busy, that sometimes I think we think we don't have enough to offer. We all have something to offer. Everybody has something to offer. Just stop second guessing and speak up. Yeah. For the legislature, it's really easy to be involved. Everything we do is recorded. It is online. You can access it online. You don't have to come to the Capitol. You can just lurk and listen online, or you can participate while you're online. I think it's a really great system that we've tried to make work for everybody across the state.
Right. I think it's, for the general Utah, I think it's, you don't know what you don't know. And because you don't really know it, it seems a little overwhelming. And it also feels at times contentious. And I don't know if that's because we're getting that fed through the media or whatever. And so sometimes there's some of us where we're just like, oh, I don't even want to enter into that space. Like that doesn't feel like it's going to bring me joy. At the same time, though, I have a concern that if we don't get involved, then what, right? If we don't get involved, like how are communities built? How do they become stronger or, whatever we want to say to that and what we want them to become. It requires us to get involved. And I know time is a precious thing that we all don't have enough of. And so I'm grateful there are individuals like you, Jill, and our other representatives that are willing to work part-time in that space, really due diligence there for sure. What's been the hardest thing about your role in the legislature?
Probably when you're misunderstood or mischaracterized. And it happens, right? Because I'm a Republican and I have that aura behind my name, people make assumptions. And that's hard because I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone. And at the end of the day, if we disagree, we disagree. And that's okay. That's healthy. But if we can't at least have a conversation and try to understand where we're coming from, then that's really sad and tragic. I remember I grew up in the Ogden Valley. So the Huntsville 4th of July was a big deal when you're a kid and when you're growing up there. We weren't allowed to go into the park and play and hang out and do all of those things. We went to the parade, then we went to the patriotic program in the church, and then we were allowed to go hang out with our friends and play. And I thought I credit my parents with that, with instilling in me this respect for our country and a sense of duty, really, because my mom, she'll say the same thing. I don't know where this came from. And I'm like, well, you did this because it was just part of who we were and what we did. And we were going to pay respect to the country that gives us so many freedoms and benefits. And so I don't know. I think we have to come back to that and say, look, we all have a responsibility to be engaged and to advocate for the things that we're passionate about. And that's going to look different for everyone. And at the end of the day, you said it before we started, we have more in common than what separates us. I fundamentally believe that. I was at a meeting today, had a constituent there, and we've had some spicy emails, but we always have a really good conversation. And she came up and just, we talked about some water policy I'd worked on. She was actually really grateful for the water policy I'd worked on. And I'm really grateful for her insight. And I said, thank you for your emails. I know we're not going to agree on everything. She goes, I don't think we'll agree on anything. I said, well, we might not, but I think we'll find some things that we do agree on. And I just said, I really value the fact that you'll take the time to tell me what you think and what you believe. And that she values the fact that I'll say the same thing. So we don't always agree, but we have found some things that we have in common.
Yeah.
So
I've appreciated Governor Cox's, I don't even know, this might have been a couple of years ago, his disagree better. We've actually talked about that a lot in my human resources field. When our national SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, John C. Tanner came to Utah to speak at our state conference, he quoted Governor Cox on that and civility. Like it is surprising to me, and then on the one hand not, but just of how polarizing everything is. And for me, the problem is it's polarizing before there's even any conversation. And it comes from the letters at the end of our names or different stereotypes. And we're not giving each other a chance to have a voice. We're not coming to the table with an open mind, open ears, open heart, right? It's like, okay, I've got my plan and this is what I'm going to do. And it's just like, well, we're not even listening to one another. And we were talking before we jumped on and hit record that I'm really passionate about advocacy for what we believe in. There's so many different things. Like, I can't even imagine you having to review all of what you have to review it. And it's just like, wow. I guess that's one question I have for you. Like, what is something that's not interesting to you? I would find myself like, I don't know if I care enough, or I'm not passionate enough about that topic. But you kind of have to, you have to care enough to dig into it, right? Oh my gosh. I didn't even know.
At least at a little, at least at a minimum. And, the great thing is that even for me as a legislator, if I'm not serving on a committee, I can go back and watch that committee hearing on a bill or a policy if I want to dig into it. And there is a fair amount of where you're going to your colleagues and saying, tell me more about this policy. You're running this. Tell me why. Help me understand the intent behind it. And so, and that's the benefit, I guess. We can go straight to the source and ask that question, right?
I love that. I love that you have colleagues. Like, the structure is built intentionally, right? And I think that we all have interests. They're not all the same. And so to expect everyone to be interested and or agree is unrealistic. But those that are interested, we need to come to the table and have open conversations. I really believe in Stephen Covey's philosophy of there's always a third alternative. The problem is we give up. We give up. It's too much, or we're just so hard-headed. And I loved how you pointed out earlier, too, that every bill that gets passed is done through negotiation, meaning most of the time, both sides are coming to the table to come to an agreement of what's going to work best. Like, everyone, getting them together. And I think that's an amazing point to know. I do think that everyone has seasons in life too. And so, you're in a season of life where you've chosen now to be in politics, but you weren't 15, 20, 30 years ago, right?
Right.
And I think that's another important thing is that we just because we're not actively engaged today doesn't mean that in the future we wouldn't be. And life leads us in different pathways. But I also love how you point out you can reflect back on your life and see the seeds that were planted, the things, starting with your mom, 4th of July, going to the church, the patriotic portion before you get to play, through the business and reading the code and finding joy in that, and then getting frustrated with your own experience in certain things that then led you to say, you know what? Like, I love what your husband said. You can either complain about it or you can do something about it, right? So at the end of the day, that's what it is. And all of those decisions are pivotal. They're hard. Like, life is hard, right? But life's experiences lead us to action. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Let me ask you one final question, Jill. You've given us some examples of what's hard, being misunderstood, misjudged in your current role. You referenced the time of starting businesses. That is not easy. Your husband losing his job and you have 3 little kids and you're wondering, wait, this wasn't part of our plan. There's so many things that happen in life. And when you're living in the middle of it, it's hard. What advice would you tell our audience today what advice would you give them when they're in the middle of their hard? What would you say?
Give yourself some grace. I think we're so quick to judge ourselves harshly, and yet we're so quick usually to give other people a lot of grace. If they're going through a hard time, we see that and we have patience and understanding and compassion. And sometimes when we're in the middle of that, it's hard to take a breath and to give ourselves that same grace and time to work through it. And at the end of the day, you're going to make it through. No matter how hard and how dark and how tricky it might seem, there is a point at which you will come through that, and you will probably be changed because of it. But just know that there is a pathway through that. And sometimes you just have to learn to sit with the hard and to give yourself some grace. You quoted some of my favorite people, Stephen Covey. We studied him all through college, and the 7 habits, sharpening your saw first, but also seeking first to understand. If we could teach that to people, and sometimes we have to do that for ourselves, right? What is this? Why do I have to go through this? And try to understand the reasons and give yourself some grace.
Yeah, I was thinking about when you were talking about your constituent and the email exchange. And I hate email. I love email and I hate email. And I love text and I hate text. But the biggest issue is that it's different when you get in the same room, heart to heart, human to human, and have conversations. I know technology makes it so much easier to connect in different ways, and it's extremely useful. But there's something to say when, especially in matters that are sensitive or polarizing, I think if we can get in a room and really be willing to hear one another, there's a greater chance for resolution. And most of the time in that resolution, neither party is coming out of that with what they thought initially, right? And I would hope that most of the time it ends up being something better overall. I love that about Stephen Covey's teachings of, compromising. It's an approach for sure, right? But when we leave with that third alternative that truly can make a difference, because now we have greater understanding on both sides, there's just something powerful about that. So love it. Oh, Jill, thank you so much. Do you have any fancy words of wisdom that you want to?
No, I think you just explained some of the best legislation that I've seen happen. Because it's started here, and then everybody comes together to work on it to solve a problem. And it is those connections that you make when you sit with one another and try to solve a problem. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Well, my friends, you've heard it from Jill. There's so much opportunity to work within the community, to give back, find what you're passionate about. And I will say this, when you find yourself in your hard for no matter what reason, remember, grace is a huge part of making it through. And so sometimes as you're sitting in it, you're sitting in the hard, all you can do is give yourself a little bit of grace and say, it's a season, I'll work through it, and we'll get there, we'll get out of it together. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you for joining me on Waking the Why. If today's story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget, your why is worth waking up for.